украинское
in
урегулирование
order
носило
to
устойчивый и
make
долгосрочный
the
характер,
settlement
должны быть устранены все
lasting and long
первопричины
term, we need
кризиса,
to
о
eliminate
которых
all the
говорили
primary roots,
неоднократно.
the
Обеспечен
primary
учет всех
causes of that
законных
conflict. And we've said
озабоченностей
it multiple
России,
times, to
восстановлен
consider all
справедливый
legitimate
баланс в
concerns
сфере
of Russia and
безопасности в
to
Европе и в
reinstate
мире
a
в
just
целом.
balance
Я
of
согласен с
security in
президентом
Europe and in
Трампом,
the
он
world on
сегодня
the whole.
говорил об
And I
этом,
agree with President
что,
Trump, as he has
безусловно,
said today,
должна быть
that
обеспечена
naturally
и
the
безопасность
security
Украины.
of Ukraine should be ensured as well.
Мы готовы над
Naturally,
этим
we are
работать.
prepared to work
Хочется
on that.
надеяться, что достигнутое нами
I would
понимание
like to hope that the
позволит
agreement that we've
приблизиться к той
reached
цели
together will
и
help
откроет
us
дорогу к
bring
миру
closer
на
that goal and
Украине.
will pave
Мы
the
рассчитываем,
path
что в
towards peace
Киеве
in
и
Ukraine.
европейских
We
столицах
expect that Kiev and
воспримут
European
все это в
capitals will
конструктивном
perceive
ключе
that
и не станут
constructively
чинить
and that
никаких
they won't throw a
препятствий.
wrench
Не
in the
будут
works.
предпринимать
They
попыток
will
за
not
счет
make any
провокаций или
attempts
закулисных интриг
to use some
сорвать
backroom dealings to
намечающийся
conduct
прогресс.
provocations to torpedo the nascent progress.
Кстати, с приходом новой администрации
Incidentally,
США
when the new
двусторонний
administration
товарооборот
came to
начал у нас
power,
повышаться.
bilateral
Все
trade
это
started to grow.
носит пока такой символический характер, но
It's still
все-таки
very
плюс
symbolic.
20%.
Still, we
Я
have
говорю о том, что у нас много
a growth of
интересных
20%. As I've
направлений
said, we have a lot
для
of
совместной
dimensions for
работы.
joint
Очевидно,
work.
что российско-американское
It is
деловое
clear that
и
US
инвестиционное
and
партнерство
Russian
имеет огромный
investment and business
потенциал. Россия и США
cooperation has
есть что
tremendous
предложить
potential.
друг другу в
Russia and the
торговле,
US can
энергетике,
offer each
цифровой
other so
сфере,
much in
высоких
trade,
технологиях и
digital,
освоении
high-tech,
космоса.
and in
Актуальным
space
видится и
exploration.
взаимодействие в Арктике,
We see
возобновление
that Arctic
межрегиональных
cooperation
контактов,
is
в том
also
числе
very
между нашими
possible.
нашим
And
Дальним
our
Востоком и
international
американским
context,
западным
for example,
побережьем.
between the Far East
В
of
общем,
Russia and the west
нашим
coast of the
странам
US.
важно и
Overall,
нужно
it's very important
перелистнуть
for our
страницу
countries to
и
turn the
вернуться к
page, to
сотрудничеству.
go back to
Символично,
cooperation.
что
It is
неподалеку
symbolic
на
that not
границе
far away from
России
here,
и
the
США, как
border
я уже
between
говорил,
Russia and the
проходит
US,
так
there
называемая
is a
линия
so-called
перемены
international
дат,
date line.
где можно буквально перешагнуть
I
из
think you can step
вчера в
over
завтра.
literally from yesterday into tomorrow.
Надеюсь, что у нас так и
And I
получится
hope that we'll succeed in
в
that.
политической сфере.
In political
Я хотел бы
sphere.
поблагодарить
I would
господина
like to
Трампа
thank
за
President
совместную
Trump
работу,
for our
за
joint work,
доброжелательный и доверительный
for the
тон беседы.
well-wishing and
Главное, что с
trustworthy
обеих
tone of
сторон
our
был настроен
conversation.
на
It's important that
результат.
both
Мы
sides
видим, что
are
президент США имеет
result-oriented, and we
четкое
see that the
представление
President
о
of the
том,
US
чего
has a
хочет
very clear
добиться,
idea of
искренне
what he would
заботится о
like to
процветании
achieve.
своей
He
страны
sincerely
и в то
cares
же
about
время
prosperity of his
проявляет
nation.
понимание наличию в России
Still, he
своих
understands that
национальных интересов.
Russia has its own
Рассчитывает, что
national
сегодняшние
interests. I
договоренности
expect that
станут
today's
опорной
agreements
точкой
will
не
be
только для
the
решения
starting
украинской
point,
проблемы,
not
но
only
и
for the
положит
solution of
начало
the Ukrainian
восстановлению
issue,
деловых,
but also will help
прагматичных
us bring
отношений
back
между
business-like
Россией
and
и США.
pragmatic
Ну и
relations
в
between Russia and the
завершение
US.
хотел бы вот что
And in the
добавить.
end, I would like to
Я
add
помню,
one
что
more
в
thing. I'd like to
2022
remind you that in
году, во время
2022,
последних контактов
during
с
the
прежней
last
администрацией, я
contact
тогда
with the previous
пытался
administration,
убедить
I tried to
своего
convince
прежнего американского
my
коллегу в
previous
том,
American
что
colleague
не нужно доводить до
that
ситуации,
the situation should not be
после наступления, которые могут наступить
brought to
тяжелые
the
последствия в
point
виде
of no
боевых
return
действий.
when it would come
И
to
прямо сказал
hostilities.
тогда,
And I
что
said
это
it quite
большая
directly
ошибка.
back then that it's a big
И
mistake.
вот сегодня мы слышим, когда президент Трамп
Today,
говорит,
when
что если бы
President
я был
Trump saying that
президентом, то войны
if he
бы
was
не
the
было.
president back then, there will be
Я
no
думаю,
war.
что так бы
And I'm
на самом деле
quite sure that it would indeed be so.
Подтверждаю
I
это,
can confirm that.
потому что в целом у
I
нас
think that
с
overall,
президентом Трампом
me and President
наладился
Trump
очень хороший
have built a very
деловой и
good
доверительный
business-like and
контакт.
trustworthy
И
contact.
у меня есть все основания
And I
полагать,
have
что
every
двигаясь
reason
по
to
этому
believe that
пути, мы
moving
можем
down this path,
дойти и до,
we can
чем
come,
быстрее, тем лучше,
and the sooner the
до
better,
завершения
to
конфликта
the
на
end of the
Украине.
conflict
Благодарю
in
вас
Ukraine.
за
Thank you.
внимание.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound, and I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Ratcliffe. Thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think, you know, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax that made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that was a bit of a teaser. We've been listening to a joint press conference between President Trump and Russian President Putin after their 3-hour meeting. Concretely, they did say an agreement has been reached and the killings would stop. Russian President Putin began by saying, talking about that agreement was reached, and he also admitted something that we've all heard the president say over and over and over again, that if he was in office, President Trump was in office when this war began, it would have never stopped. Putin agreed upon that, and Putin also said the previous administration is partly to blame for this war. And then President Trump took the mic. He said as soon as he's done here, he's calling NATO. He's calling Zelensky to let them know what happened. He said many points were agreed upon, a few were not. It was a very, very positive 3-hour meeting. We don't know what those points were agreed upon, but before they left the podium, President Trump did say the killings of 4, 5, 6,000 people a week would stop. So we have to believe that there will be some sort of a ceasefire was agreed upon, but we just do not know. We want to bring in one of America's chief White House correspondent, Daniel Baldwin, who is standing by live in front of the White House. Daniel, what did you take away from that?
Sort of similar to you, Mike. Thanks for having me on. Of course, a lot of platitudes given by both presidents, and just a couple of things to highlight from President Trump's perspective, right? Some of the phrases that he used: extremely productive meeting, great progress was made, just a very few are left, sort of loose ends when it comes to trying to create that pathway to peace. Quote, we didn't get there, but we have a good chance. of getting there. And then, of course, the translation is a little bit muddied when it came to the Russian president, but I believe they did say in the translation, Putin saying, we had an agreement, and like you said, the killing would stop. You have to take a step back, Mike, and remember what the president's priorities were coming into this meeting. He wanted an immediate ceasefire, and he wanted this meeting to be productive enough to the point where they could get a second meeting almost immediately that included the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, in that as well. But the main priority for President Trump is he wanted an immediate ceasefire. Again, a very brief press conference. The relationship between Putin and Trump seems to be pretty good, and President Trump seemed pleased with the outcome given the way he talked about it, but the bottom line is we just don't know what the agreement, the details are at this point in time.
Why do we think that they didn't take any questions from the press? Why do we think it was so brief? And what do you think the next step is right now for both presidents?
Well, speaking right now from experience, Mike, as a White House correspondent, as someone who is here every day and interacts with President Trump multiple times a week, usually, those press conferences when he takes questions, it can kind of get like the wild, wild west. People shouting and screaming. And for example, Monday, we were in there and taking questions on D.C. and federalizing the D.C. police force. It was hectic. It was a bit like a zoo. It was every man and woman for herself. So having Russian President Vladimir Putin in very different customs that Russia has for its press, that might be a bit of a reason as to why they chose not to take questions. That's just speculation, though. That's not actually me having anything sourced. Who knows? Maybe the details are still getting actually worked out. But again, all we can do is base our takeaway on what we heard. And both leaders seemed pleased. They emphasized that a lot of progress had been made. The translation of President Putin's remarks said an agreement had been made. President Trump emphasized they made a lot of progress, but they still needed a few extra points to get settled. They needed to tie up a few other loose ends. And the big question remains now is, was there an immediate ceasefire? And will there be a second meeting that includes the Ukrainian president, Mike? And those are the questions that need to be answered.
President Putin obviously took the podium first. He made some points about the war, the history of Russia, but for me, the big takeaway is what Trump has been talking about on his campaign trail and much of his presidency. If he was in office, this war would have never began. What do you think about that? No, and it's an obvious point that anybody who's lived through the presidencies of former President Obama, Trump, and then former President Biden, it doesn't take a PhD to recognize that that point is true, Mike, because under Obama, we had the Crimea incident. There was nothing under Trump, and then the Biden era, we had the Afghanistan withdrawal, and then we had the NATO incidents, and Putin ended up invading Ukraine in February of 2022. And the difference is that Trump has the idea of a credible threat behind him. When he talks about severe economic sanctions, it's not bluffing, because he just hit India with a 50% tariff for buying Russian oil and gas. And he has this bravado, and he leads where he makes a threat. The threat is, generally speaking, credible in a certain light. But again, President Trump is really, what happened today, Mike, is historic in and of itself when you think about the specific details, right? This is the deadliest war in Europe in the last 80 years. The meeting lasted 3 hours. This is Putin's 8th trip. The first Russian president to visit Alaska since Moscow sold it to the United States back in the 1800s, 1867, I believe. And again, there's a lot of potential between the U.S.-Russian relationship, specifically in the Arctic area. Russia, Greenland, China, they all kind of converge together at the Arctic Circle. There's a lot of ways that the United States and Russia could possibly work together on new shipping lanes that might be opening up around that Arctic area. But again, the president has been very clear. No economic cooperation is going to happen until Putin chooses peace, and there's a lasting peace deal, or at least an immediate ceasefire, Mike. All right, I wanted to reiterate and correct something that I may have said. Earlier on, when Putin was talking, they said that they had an agreement was in place, and I may have misspoke and said a deal was in place. They did use the word of some sort of agreement. Putin used those words while he was behind the podium. I want to also ask you about what, I want you to speculate on this, that Trump is now going to call upon NATO and Zelensky. I want you to speculate what that conversation might entail.
I think the president will be very frank with both of those parties, because the bottom line is we've moved on from phase one of the president's attempt to end this war. Phase one was diplomacy with Russia, engaging in conversations with Russia and trying to bring it about that end. President Trump felt like Putin was tapping him along, so he moved on to phase two, which was essentially ramping up the rhetoric on Putin, beginning to side more and more on the NATO-Ukraine side, selling weapons to NATO, ultimately threatening Russia with severe economic sanctions, hammering India, which isn't a random country, by the way. India is a major player on the world trade world trade platform, Mike. Obviously, the United States and India had more than $110 billion worth of bilateral goods trade last year, and India is a key different selling partner to avoid China as well. It shows that the president is willing and able to hit anyone that's going to buy Russian products. So if the president is truly not thrilled with how things went, and the bottom line is he said he was, but he'll be blunt and he'll act accordingly. That's the nature of President Trump. He's always willing to respond and evolve. But the bottom line is right now, we'll know how well the meeting went based on, is there an immediate ceasefire, and will there be a second meeting that involves the Ukrainian president?
Final question. Do you think that we're going to get more information on this meeting today, or do you think it's just going to trickle out over the next week, or do you think they're waiting until those phone calls happen with NATO and Zelensky?
I think we'll hear some stuff today, Mike. I think the press is very ravenous. I think there will begin to be leaks. You know, we heard the Russian news wires talking about how the meeting was very well, it was productive. But the bottom line is we want to know what the President of the United States thinks. We want to hear President Trump's opinion. I think it's likely that the President gaggles with the press en route back to the United States. He gaggled with them going to Alaska. I think he will gaggle with them coming back to the White House. It'll be a very late night. He's not expected to get back here until around 4:30 in the morning. But I think we'll get some more details, not only today, but sporadically throughout the weekend. And if not then, the president will definitely make himself available to the press next week, and he'll be hit with questions then too, Mike.
All right, One America's chief White House correspondent Daniel Baldwin, live from the North Lawn. Thank you, Daniel, and have a wonderful weekend. All right, President Trump says Democrats are buying.
One America News Network, your source for credible, honest, unbiased reporting from around the world, has just launched a live, 24/7, 365 days a year, uninterrupted cable feed on YouTube. And it's only $5.99 per month. Now you can watch One America News Network live, anytime, anywhere in the world. Go to our YouTube page and click here to become a member today. One America News Network, your source for credible, honest, unbiased reporting from around the world, has just launched a live, 24/7, 365 days a year, uninterrupted cable feed on YouTube. And it's only $5.99 per month. Now you can watch One America News Network live, anytime, anywhere in the world. Go to our YouTube page and click here to become a member today. One America News Network, your source for credible, honest, unbiased reporting from around the world, has just launched a live, 24/7